Begin. So, all right, without further ado, it's a Tuesday. People are busy, and this is their lunch hour. I think we should get started. I want to thank everyone for joining this Zoom call. Welcome everyone into my study and Professor Ruth Wisse's study to talk about her beautiful, illuminating, lustrous, gorgeously written lead essay for our second edition of SAPIR, which is devoted entirely to the subject of power, Jews and power. Our first issue was about social justice. Our forthcoming issue is going to be on the subject of continuity. And we're still hashing out our fourth and final issue, but I suspect it is going to have something to do with Jewish aspiration. But don't hold me to that because we still have to iron that out. But I want to talk about your essay, Ruth. And you were, in fact, probably the reason for this entire issue, not just your essay alone, but everything else in it. Because now it must be 13 or 14 years ago, you wrote a very short but very important book on the subject of Jews and power. And in some sense, your essay for this issue of SAPIR is a continuation or an addendum to that book, because it's on the subject, obviously closely related, of Jews and powerlessness and the allure, this word allure of powerlessness. Now, this is a strange thing that you need to explain for us, because for most of the world, power is a very simple concept. The more of it you have, the better off you are. For Jews, it's a very difficult concept. We are, and have long been, profoundly ambivalent about the possession, existence, use, and potential for abuse of power. This seems written into the DNA of the Jewish people, if not biologically, certainly then ethically. So start us off, Ruth, by explaining why this is so problematic, why this idea of power has been so difficult for the Jews.
Well, it's exactly how I start the book on Jews and power. And let me just say that it's not a simple subject, but I tried to think it through for myself. And what occurred to me was that it's not at all true that Jews are not interested in power. They couldn't be disinterested or uninterested. We are, after all, reputed to be an intelligent people. And I think that our experience, yours and mine, certainly among the people we know, would confirm that, a very intelligent people. An intelligent people does not go out into the world disliking the idea of power. So let's not start there. Let's assume that Jews, in fact, had an extraordinary idea of power. And that's what I tried to describe. And that is that they really believed that, having made a contractual agreement with God, that if they fulfilled their side of that agreement by being the people that God had expected them to be, and if they lived up to it according to all the laws and obligations that they take upon themselves, well then, God would be the source of their power. And they had proof of that. The point is, they didn't just go in blindly. They had evidence of that as far as they were concerned. And oddly enough, the evidence came after the first expulsion, after the first destruction of the temple. The temple was destroyed. They were in Babylon. and by the rivers of Babylon. I mean, you know, this is really, and we all sang songs of that kind, not Bob Marley, but we had our own versions of that. When I went to Jewish camp, of course, we sang Al Naharot Bavel, right? So we know that story. It's in our DNA. And what is that story? It's amazing. Okay, we're in exile in Babylon, but what difference does that make? You think that Babylon defeated us? Ridiculous. We were defeated because we didn't live up to God's expectations. And the moment we begin to live up to God's expectations, God will restore us to Zion. Every Jew knows that. Every Jew believes that. And what's more, let me just say from personal experience, in the summer times, we pray in a very tiny synagogue up in the Adirondacks. The maximum that it can hold is 70 people. And sometimes, very often it has fewer than that. But we stand there, and when you sing, you know, if you'll forgive me to sing in a secular context, Adonai Melech, Adonai Malach, Adonai Imloch Leolam Va'ed. God rules, and God will rule forever. And all the attributes of God include the Lord of hosts, the power of powers. So who can hold a candle to us? So the idea was not that we were going out into the world to be destroyed over and over again. The idea was that we were answerable to really, this is not just a word, the higher power. We were answerable to the Lord of the universe, to the highest power of all. So as long as Jews believed that and lived within that context, we were literally indestructible. Rome couldn't destroy us. All these people, they were just instruments of history, but they were just instruments because we were not yet fulfilling our obligations.
And this is a reversal, though, of the usual, I would say, almost universal thinking about power, which is typically that if you're powerful, you are moral. Whereas for Jews, if you're moral, you might be powerful, right? I mean, at least, and from a theological standpoint, that might be right. And I guess in the long arc of 4,000 years, there's a certain amount of evidence to back that up. In the long arc of history, there's a lot of evidence not to back it up, right? It's a problematic approach to the question of power.
Very problematic, very intriguing, I would say. It wasn't meant to be original. I mean, Jews didn't go out into the world to say, hey, let's be an original people. But they did take upon themselves this obligation, which they felt was unique, to make this contractual agreement, to be a people that actually lived up to, believe it or not, God's standards of excellence. And this is what one aspires to. So it has, in a way, what I tried to show is that it served the Jews very well in many respects, that you could always pick yourself up and go on again, that you always had this idea that you were there for the, basically for the long run, and that as long as you lived within this framework and continued to act within this framework. So it's not just that you believe that to do good will be rewarded in the sense that we think that, good people will get good rewards. I don't think that, Jewish thinking was as naive as that at all. I think it understood very well, and the rabbis became more and more and more thoughtful about this. They understood that this was problematic and that it had tremendously difficult consequences for the actual flesh and blood living Jewish people. However, it made it possible to live anywhere and to keep going and to take the Ark of the Covenant in some sense with you and to put it up there in every synagogue and to keep this amazing civilization going and to keep improving it, right? And to keep refining it. And it worked in terms of making us, I think, extremely adaptable. So in writing about this subject, I think it's important always to emphasize the good that it brought. In other words, the actual effects of this civilizing process that made it possible to go from country to country, to adapt to language after language, to create one's own version of these languages, to create cultures in each of these countries. I mean, Jews are an extraordinary people. Right?
But the virtues of adaptability have to be, if I can push back, have to be considered also by the ways in which that kind of ability to adapt twists your thinking or your inner compass. And you start your essay with this absolutely superb little joke of two Jews in a wagon along a road, encounter a huge boulder in their path. They don't know what to do. They begin to exchange ideas. A pair of peasants come in the opposite direction, faced with the same problem of the boulder. The peasants jump out of their cart, heave the boulder over to one side and move past. And the punchline for the Jews is there's goyish thinking, always with force, right?
Right, it's a great joke.
So there's a kind of intoxication that goes with this celebration of a certain kind of powerlessness. On the one hand, it creates, you mentioned adaptability, humor. It creates a sense of moral imagination as well as indignation. But the point of that story is that it also fosters a certain kind of helplessness, correct?
Of course. And as I tried to point out, the morality of it becomes extremely problematic once you get into the modern world. And if you don't believe that the ultimate source of power is in God, this is what began to bother me. In other words, religious Jews or Jews who actually believe in some real way, substantial way, that the power is with God in history, and that this contractual agreement will work itself out in history. When you're working within that framework, you have a right to bring children into the world as Jews. But here's my problem. If you don't believe that, literally, then what right do you have to bring children into the world as Jews if you are not going to protect them physically the way other people do? So that the morality of powerlessness is, as far as I see, corrupt. There is no morality in powerlessness, you see. This is why I place such emphasis on the idea of how the Jews actually saw themselves as being powerful.
So in the 18th and 19th century, as you point out in your essay, the idea that God protects, right, began to dissolve, at least among significant portions of emancipated Jewry. So then they had to begin to discover an alternative set of answers to the problem that you are describing, right?
Absolutely.
And those answers were the beneficence of the enlightened powers of France and Prussia, or then later Germany and England, or Bolshevism, or some kind of dissolving of everything through some kind of socialist or communist program, or finally, of course, and a bit of a latecomer, Zionism. So take us through, but in particular, take us through that first that first solution, which was the enlightened Goy will protect us.
Well, I'm here. I don't know whether it's the enlightened. Jews always tried to make this agreement, also political agreement, with the people among whom they lived. Look, my colleague Gershon Hundert, who's the historian of Polish Jewry, used to talk about Jews and other Poles, which for him was not exactly a joke, because he really was one of the people who emphasized how Jews had been invited to Poland, and how in the Polish sphere, where lords, ran their own cities, Jews were very valuable to these people, and they had every right to expect. This was in a pre-modern context. They had every right to expect the Lord to protect them because of what they were offering. So there was this quid pro quo that could be reestablished. The only thing is that, as you're right to point out, that we depend to a tremendous degree on those prospective protectors. And that is the vulnerability ultimately. So when the Enlightenment came, and when this idea of progress came, Jews were delighted. Oh my God, now, we're all going to be equal. We're all going to be treated equally. We're all going to have equal opportunity. There was a tremendous investment of faith in liberalism. There was a tremendous investment of faith in modern liberal societies, thinking that now democracy itself would become that form of collective protection for everyone alike, including the Jews. So this is very, you can understand why Jews invest so much hope and faith in these things. But again, the question is always, so then what happens when your faith it's not your faith in God that is destroyed. If you're a thinking Jew in the modern world, it's not your faith in God that Hitler destroyed. It was your faith in man that Hitler destroyed. You could never again really place your faith in a modern society, because of course, Germany was the culture center of the European continent. What could be higher than Bach and Brahms and Schiller and Goethe? And when I was at Harvard, I was in the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations. The one sine qua non non-Eastern language that you had to have in order to graduate as a PhD was a German. How could you be a scholar in this area with a German? So that was the last time I think Jews should ever really think that they can depend on, it's not that, I'm sorry to interrupt myself here, but it's not that America is going to become Germany. That's absurd when people say things like that. Oh, it's becoming just like this. It's not that. That's not the worry. The worry is that you cannot place your faith in its protecting us as a people. You cannot.
Well, I wanted to pick up on that because and ask you to expand on that. I mean, the German liberal experiment, as far as the Jews were concerned, lasted from roughly maybe the end of the 18th century, really almost the middle of the 19th, the Bismarckian period, up through arguably 1933, although always with a tremendous inflection of anti-Semitism, even in the First World War, when Jews were serving with distinction in the Kaiser's army. But it was an experiment of emancipation that lasted at best 100 years or so, right? The American experiment is obviously quite different. As people point out, it doesn't just begin in 1776, it begins in 1654 with the rebuke by his Dutch masters, Peter Stuyvesant's the rebuke of Peter Stuyvesant in his efforts to turn away 23 Jews from Brazil. So you have a roughly 370 odd year American experience of tolerance that's really quite remarkable. And as you noted, now there is, I think, a kind of a shiver of fear and doubt among many American Jews, and I suspect many people who are listening in on this call, about just how good that American guarantee is. So is it really so, just to get back to what you're saying, is it really so absurd to think that, to paraphrase the old line, it can't happen here?
Well, the reason it's not absurd has nothing to do with the Jews. Of course, it's not absurd, but the question, it depends on how we put it. What it depends upon is not on anything that has to do with us, even though, of course, it begins to manifest itself most dangerously, and perhaps first of all, in a growing anti-Semitism. But what that anti-Semitism betokens, what it says about America, is dangerous. And if America ceases to be that country, if America fails itself in the way that Germany failed itself, that's when there is no escape. So our investment in America may be greater than that of many other people. Every minority in a way is susceptible and has to worry about the majority. But we have a real stake in what you say, in the history of America, in the depth of American democracy, in the depth of that culture of self-accountability in America. And when that begins to fail, as it has been failing, as we feel it eroding, and I would really very strongly argue that the incidence of anti-Semitism rising in America, especially in entering Congress, right, things of that kind, and the loss of what I call moral confidence among the Jews in themselves, and the pressure that you feel, the danger here is, yes, to the Jews, of course, but the greater danger is to this country, because if it really wants to start blaming the Jews instead of holding itself accountable, if it is no longer strong enough to contain those dangerous elements of blame the other, then the country is lost. And if the country is going to go the way of, dictatorship or authoritarianism, or really bowing to that leftism, which is really, incipient totalitarianism in one form or another, if it keeps going in that direction as quickly as it has been doing, then we see the demise of this country. So when people say, it may be time to pack up your bags and get out, I'm not worried about packing my bags and getting out as a Jew, to be honest with you. In this case, I really am a little bit more selfless, in the sense of I'm worried about America can't pack up its bags and go. It's the country that is at stake here.
Let me ask you about this, because I think this is an important topic. And by the way, I should just digress for 1 second. There are people in the audience who I'm sure have questions for Ruth. There's a chat function on your Zoom. And so as you have questions, put them in the chat function, and I'll try to get to as many as I can, or at least what seem like the most interesting ones in the last part of this conversation. Let me ask you, certainly in the last few years, we've seen all kinds of minority groups asserting cultural and political and social power in the United States, in all kinds of institutions and in the public square at large. One group seems to me to be conspicuously missing from that trend, and that's when it comes to Jews, where power seems to be visibly waning. In fact, we have a wonderful essay at SAPIR from Thane Rosenbaum,
Yes,
that kind of gives you a chapter and verse on just all of the ways in which that power is waning. So what are your thoughts on how to start exercising that muscle again, or if it's possible at all?
Well, this is what one is trying to do. I think that I don't know to what extent you're engaged in it, but yeah, I've been engaged in it pretty much full time for some time now. Tikva is one organization that is trying to do that at a teaching and intellectual level. In other words, you build a Jewish conservatism. And what conservatism means here is to conserve Judaism. And in the American context, to conserve liberal democracy as America has known it. Conservatism now has become the element that I'm speaking of, the dedication to conserving the best of this country, which, by the way, is the most progressive country in the world. I mean, the two most progressive societies that I know of intimately, there may be others, I don't know those others intimately, are America and Israel. They are progress. This is what human progress resulted in, these two incredible societies. Now, when people come and they use the word progressives, they are really the regressives. So one of the ways in which we do that is to reclaim the vocabulary. I'm sorry, they are not the progressives. If to skip here, Ben & Jerry's considers itself progressive by damning the only progressive country in the Middle East, that's regressive. What they're looking to is the imposition of authoritarianism of the worst kind of societies over the best kind of societies. So I think that one fights it at every level, including the level of language.
Let me ask you this follow-on question, which is that I mean, it's almost a stereotypical Jewish answer. We have a terrible political problem. More and more people hate us. We're being demonized. What should we do? We should have a seminar. In fact, a whole series of seminars. I don't want to take that. I don't want to be too light about this, because I absolutely agree that it's important. What are other groups doing? They're having mass marches. How did Jews accomplish something politically in living memory? They organized a movement for Soviet Jewry, which brought out millions of Jews, or not millions, but certainly tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Jews into the streets of Washington, D.C. for this tremendous and ultimately very successful movement. In other words, they adopted the kind of mass tactics of what we now associate with the left, right, in order to accomplish Jewish goals. Is that something that you think is also worth doing, or is it a fool's errand?
Well, I think that you can't adapt anybody else's tactics if you are a minority of the kind that Jews are. If we've been describing a very unique kind of arrangement with power, and with power as it's manifest in history, then your reactions have to be very unique as well. You have to think things through from the ground up, the way Zionism did. You have to really be very daring, very bold, but you can't follow anybody else's script. The reason that the Soviet Jewry movement was so successful in its time was because it fit squarely into the American Cold War pattern. I mean, you were fighting on the side of America in the Cold War, and so you felt all that confidence. And of course, these two things did become aligned, right, in Congress, where the Vanik,
Jackson Vanik.
Thank you, Jackson Vanik. The ruling of Congress was that it actually bound together these two things: the request or the demand for the right of Soviet Jews to leave the Soviet Union if they wanted to, and the easing of relations with the Soviet Union, right? So these two things were aligned. They are not aligned today. They're certainly not aligned with the politics of the Democratic Party. And they don't seem to be aligned with a lot of what the American mood is of not getting entangled in foreign things, of not standing tall. So I think that a lot of it now has to do with what we do. In answer to your question, what we do is we have to invest in the parts of America that are that serve us, and we serve them. We need a strong country. We need a country that goes back to the Federalist Papers, that goes back to its belief in, the greatness of this country, that wants to say the Pledge of Allegiance every morning, that wants to rise and sing proudly the national anthem, that learns about how difficult it was to build this country, the separation of powers, all the things that one takes for granted, not to take a single one of them for granted any longer. To start, this is what we have to be doing.
And do you think, and I ask this very sincerely, that sort of the Republican Party's turn towards a certain kind of populism has helped or hindered that?
Well, I understand the Republican Party a little bit differently from the way you do. And I don't know whether this is the proper context for getting into that. It's not so much that it's populism, but what I feel as someone who is more identified with the Republican Party now is that the Republican Party senses this danger. And this danger, by the way, is much clearer to someone who was in the academy than it may be to people anywhere else. It's really the ruin of the places of higher learning, as I experienced it in over 21 years at Harvard, when you see how quickly a great institution can become eroded from within by bad ideas, taking out the good ideas, then you realize how vulnerable the society is as a whole. And then what you want to stand for is stand up and salute again, for God's sake. Go back to basics. Do something of that kind. So what I find, the hope of the Republican Party, which is vulnerable as well by many forces, is not some kind of cheap populism. And I don't understand Trump as a great danger the way others do. To me, he's the president in the altogether. And that's one of the reasons that he was such a relief, because it put an end to deception. Think of how marvelous it was. The story, why I say the president in the altogether, the story of the child of the king who wore no clothes. Yeah. Right. So the king, everybody pretended that he was there in his robes, and the child comes out and he says, he's not wearing any clothes. Well, here you have a president who says, look, I'm not wearing any clothes. Look at me. Here's how, warts and all, nothing but warts. You want to see how vulgar I am? Look at me. This is how, you want to know what I'm saying and what I'm thinking? I'll show it to you all. My God, in the culture of deception and of fakeness in every level, there is something about someone who you see. I did not see it, you see, the way some of my colleagues did, some of the best minds I know did, as demagoguery. I did not see it as that at all. I just saw this kind of, this media personality, right, who thought that he could be president, and he came and he just took it over, did some things very well, did some things, you could tear your hair out. If one voted for Trump, that's when one was nervous watching him speak every time, because you had a stake in this and you thought, oh my God, he can't be saying that. Oh my God, please don't say it. You wanted to rewrite every script, but that was not, I'm not worried about that populism or what you call it. It's not that at all, Bret. It's just the country fighting for its own survival. It's people who understand what's at stake. They just don't know how to get it back.
You mentioned
all the Republicans I know, by the way, up in the country and the Adirondacks and the Christians and Jews and so on. These are the people I know.
You mentioned that the institutions as you knew them, and you were at Harvard for many years, have kind of collapsed in terms of their moral confidence. Alan Bloom thinks this collapse happened in 1968, but I mean, you were part of the academy after 1968, and there clearly was enough of a center there to keep you there for a long time. But do you think these institutions can be refurbished, recaptured, reimagined, restored? Or is the task to create a whole different set of alternative institutions to uphold a kind of liberalism in which Jews can not only be safe, but can thrive? New newspapers, new universities, new high schools, new prize committees, new publishing houses, a whole alternative secondary universe where principles that are conducive to thriving Jewish life and security will do well. I mean, what's the right model? If someone is here, let's imagine that there's someone listening in here and they've got a couple $2 billion spare that they don't know what to do with. And one option is, I'm going to give it all to Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, right, to set up some institutions. Or the other thing is, let's start something brand new, de novo, where we can really put our stamp on it. What would you advise that person? And by the way, I have no idea whether I'm who's listening in on this call, but it's just a nice thought experiment.
Well, no, SAPIR set out with a kind of a practical idea of putting out feelers like the question that you're asking. I mean, they're not looking for just ideas, as you said, seminars, nor am I. They're looking for how this translates into practical decisions. I wish I could give a blanket answer to your question. You included a kind of reproach, I think rightly so, in your question. You reminded me that if Bloom was already saying this in 68 and you're saying this in 2000, I mean, after all, haven't the institutions proven themselves to a certain extent? Aren't you calling them out a little bit too early? So therefore, I would say anything which is salvageable, of course one would want to salvage. But just to give you an example, people who have tried to reintroduce the conservative, by which I mean the soundest ideas, the most rational ideas, the most proven ideas, the ideas that most of us live by and swear by and are loyal to. Everyone who has tried so far to reintroduce those into Harvard, into Yale, into Princeton, through these institutes like the Madison Institute and so on, these things have failed. The schools have become so incapable of alternative ideas, really. The people who have gotten jobs through affirmative action are never going to let excellence rule again, because they don't feel that they could last in a school which really supports excellence. All they want are the things which still have to do with affirmative action, so that they can continue teaching these courses on what I call grievance and blame in one form or another. So this is very difficult. How do you get this back? How do you get a whole, you have now whole departments that would never let in a person who has a really strong, intelligent, let me say, somebody like Peter Berkowitz, for example, who is a liberal and who speaks of liberalism and teaches liberalism. He was sacked from the university. He's not the worse for it, but he's in the think tanks, and every one of us, everybody else is in a think tank somewhere or other.
So you're sort of giving me an answer, which is that there's going to be a flight to excellence from existing institutions, or institutions that have to be created, if not created anew, that are sort of still kind of young and capable of being formed. There are a whole lot of questions piling up in the Q&A function, or the chat function, but I do want to turn, at least for a few minutes, to Israel, right? Because in some ways Israel is the antithesis, right? It's Jewish power embodied and made real in a sovereign state. And yet in your essay you point to two, although really you stress one kind of threat to it, right? I mean, one, there are two sort of strains in Israeli life which fetishize a certain kind of powerlessness, if I read you right. One is a left, which was very powerful in the 1990s during the Oslo process, much less significant politically today, thanks to hard lessons learned over the last 20 years. The other is the Haredi community, the ultra-Orthodox community. And how do we sort of engage in a conversation or shape those sets of attitudes with respect to their deeply ambivalent views about what Zionism is and should be?
Well, I for obvious reasons, I worry less about Israel. I can't worry so creatively about Israel because I'm not in the country. I can worry creatively about the protection of Israel from outside, but it's not my role, unfortunately, at this moment in time to worry from the inside. However, I would put it a little differently. I just saw something this morning, actually, in the Times of Israel. A UN report on global warming has conveyed dire warnings over the state of the planet, but Jerusalem is expressing hopes that Israel's scientific know-how will turn it into an international beacon for countries seeking to combat, mitigate, or avoid the coming storms. Now, if you ask me, what's the danger facing Israel? I wouldn't even note those two things which you have noted, but I would say it's this idea, if only we can prove ourselves to come to Florida and show how helpful we are in digging out these bodies. If only we can now come and show, oh, is there a climate crisis? Israel will know how to solve this. We are the solvers. We can do this. Of course we are. Of course we are the builders. If we were the problem, then we could always find a solution. Everything that depends on the Jews that we can do ourselves, I would believe in and put my faith in. That isn't their problem. The problem that they're facing is not that. The problem is the evil of other countries. The problem is where other countries are in this world, what their idea of the world is. And because we are so small, we really have to take into account what is the reality out there. We're never going to win people over because of how good we are. I bring that example in the essay, that the better we were, the more they blamed us, for taking over everybody's jobs. And of course, of worrying that, oh, the Jews are really coming in to take it away from us. That's not it. We have to be concerned with the evil out there. And we have to find a way of lessening that evil somehow. And one of the ways we can do that is through our strength and our moral resilience and our willingness to speak for ourselves and to say why we are as we are and why they have to change.
It occurs to me that it's a shorthand perhaps for what you're saying is that relationships based on love rarely grow into respect, but relationships based on respect frequently grow into love. Is that something like it?
Very beautifully put. And yes.
I'll have to put it in a column one of these
And
days.
why you're a columnist and I am not.
Let me turn to some questions because we really have a kind of a growing and rich field here. Although I do want to make, it's an important point that you are making, and I don't want to let it pass, which is, if I can parse what you're saying, is that Israel will not do well by trying to make conspicuous displays of virtue and altruism, not because virtue and altruism should be things to be avoided, not because they aren't things to be proud of, but because in effect, it is trying to make Israel, it is trying to give Israel strength by aspects of life that don't provide it with actual power, right? As opposed to aspects of life that do. I was once in a debate with a very left-wing person whose name is familiar to everyone on this call, and we were asked what we love about Israel, and this other person, I think, said, oh, the socialist legacy of the kibbutzim or something, and my opinion was nuclear weapons. Because nuclear weapons are the floor, the foundation on which the security of Jewish life in some fundamental, if largely unspoken way, fundamentally depends. With nuclear weapons, no one gets wiped out in Babi Yar, period. And everything else is commentary.
That's very helpful, but if I could just turn it around.
Yes, please do.
No, really. Let me put it this way. In the synagogue where I grew up, it said over the ark, know before whom you stand. And that was very profound because it sort of made every day Yom Kippur, right? Know before whom you stand. In other words, you're standing there before the ultimate judge. And when you stand before the ultimate judge, you really should be able to be as honest and as forthright, as good, as kind, as whatever you are, because you're standing before the ultimate fair judge. If you stand before your enemy in the same posture as you stand before your God, the enemy who's calling you out, the enemy who's not even acknowledged your right to exist, before the United Nations, which has behaved despicably towards the Jews. If you stand before the United Nations and before the Arab world or before your accusers, even the accusers in America or whoever else, and you stand before them in the same posture as you stand before God, trying to prove yourself to them, that's insanity. That's not morality. And that's the danger of the Jews, that they carry this idea of having to prove themselves, which is a wonderful quality if you're trying to prove yourself within that original context that we began with. That is the highest calling. But if you take that same posture of proving yourself and you bring it to the world and you think that's what you have to do in the world community, I would say that is the very opposite of a moral posture. That's why moral confidence depends on something completely different, on being true to your own self, and definitely, as you say, to your own tradition and to your own people, and to carrying forward this civilization that we have created.
Let me turn to questions because they're piling up, and we probably won't get to all of them. But I want to draw a little bit on your academic pedigree as someone in the heart of Jewish studies as part of the academy. Could you talk a little bit more about the state of Jewish studies as you experience them?
You have another hour.
Well, this is a morning show, so just give it to us in 30 seconds or less.
I'm not good at sound bites. It's been, I have a book coming out, which is my memoir, and a lot of it, unfortunately, deals with disappointment. My own life, it's been the most, almost embarrassingly terrific. I have nothing but gratitude. I can never express as much gratitude as I feel to fate itself and to everything that I've been able to experience. However, the trajectory that I have been witness to has unfortunately been downward. And part of that is also in the field of Jewish studies. We built the field of Jewish studies. I'm speaking not just for myself, but the Association for Jewish Studies began the very same year that I began to teach. We started because we thought we would bring Jewishness, our civilization, into the academy, what we represented, our way of learning, our history, our strength, our story. We would bring it into the academy. What you have now is the many people, many people who are represented in the Association for Jewish Studies, maybe not the majority, hopefully, and certainly not students that I know well who are out there teaching, and certainly not the best teachers and the better teachers, but too many teachers are doing the exact opposite. Oh, what's the trend of the moment? Oh, really? Women's studies, wokeness, sexual adjustments and all that. Where can I find that in Jewish literature and make it fit? How can I adapt that? So that the whole of it seems to me that the whole of Jewish studies, it's been sort of flipped from going into the academy to bring what we have and to make it a piece of what is being taught in Jewish studies. Instead of that, showing, nervously, oh, surely we can find something in Jewish history which will fit into that little category. We can show how diverse we are. We can show that we have Black people. We can show that we have whatever the going thing is at the university at a certain point. It's so discouraging. And of course, anti-Israel plays a tremendous role in this. The stronger anti-Israel feeling is in the academy, the more the Jewish studies teachers have gone on the defensive, instead of being the front line, the fighting front line. Now that too, by the way, has to be qualified. There are now organizations like the Academic Engagement group in the academy, and there are groups, scholars for peace in the Middle East. There are groups which are now within the academy and fighting strongly as well, but they are not the majority in Jewish studies.
But it's so interesting. I'll just add very briefly that in the spirit of Andrew Jackson's "One man with courage makes a majority," or so it's alleged to have said. Right? I mean, the academics who do stand up here and there for old-fashioned, in the classical sense, liberal principles, do very well. I mean, my friend Bob Zimmer has transformed the University of Chicago by making it the one place that isn't capitulating, as other schools are, to every fashionable and illiberal trend. So there is, and my friend Barry Weiss has become an absolute, my old friend Barry Weiss has become an absolute sensation by kind of standing up against this culture of intolerance and doublethink. I want to get to one or two more questions, and I apologize to the audience for not having gotten to them sooner. One is from my friend from Toronto, Martin Crossell, and he is, since you have a Canadian pedigree, this I think is a worthy question. He says, the greatest danger to the United States is that it's becoming too much like my home and native land, Canada. Seriously though, I think the first step to setting America right is forcing the left to confront its pro-totalitarian past and not let it get away with claiming they have a morality and the concern for democracy and human rights. That's a statement, but care to comment?
Well, I would concur. I mean, I think that we have been complicit, Jews have been complicit in emphasizing the totalitarian impulse of the right, because to us that's obvious. But we have been complicit in trying to hide, to conceal, to cover up, dangerously cover up the totalitarian impulse of the left. And it doesn't have to manifest itself in Stalinism right away. It's what you see creeping into the universities. And in every way, I absolutely do not want to demonize, quote, the left, or to make this too simplistic in any way. But I do think that we used McCarthyism as a means of never confronting the degree to which Jews really got caught up in communism as an idea and an ideal that should replace Judaism and should replace Americanism. We never had to face that because we used McCarthy as a means of saying, oh, McCarthy, he's the danger, he's the danger. Well, it turns out that McCarthy was not at all the danger. He was out there within 2 years, but the communist influence grew and grew. Those children, you know, I can recognize within a very few minutes kids who grew up in communist households. I think even to this day, I mean, they're true believers, many of them, and they're out there, they're fighting the good fight. They really believe this. They believe that's their ideal. Equity above all, that you have to egalitarianize everything. They actually believe that communism is the better way. And they are really very influential in the world of ideas and in subtler ways as well. So I think this is a very much bigger question. And it's a question that weighs very heavily on me as a Jew in terms of what we do bear responsibility for. There are many things we do not bear responsibility for that we're charged with, but this is something that no one charges us with, but it is definitely something that we ought to charge ourselves with.
Unrelatedly, what should we do with our pints of Ben and Jerry's?
I think, I'll tell you what, though, I feel very sorry now for the franchisees of Ben and Jerry who say, listen, why put us out of business? We're innocent in all of this. So I feel sorry for them. But I would say that, listen, the only thing that could set back or maybe even destroy the boycott, sanctions, and divestment movement is to bring down Ben and Jerry's. If one could bring down Ben and Jerry's, that would be the end of the boycott movement, because that would show what power is. If you have the power to destroy those who are trying to destroy you, then you can be respected. And through respect will come love, to quote you. But do we have the power to do that? Or are we just nipping away, you know, at the edges so that we should feel comfortable saying that we stood up to this a little bit? It's a very big question, because that was evil. That was evil to single this out. That is an attack on Israel and on the Jewish people and the right of Israel to exist. It is a genocidal, its implications are genocidal, and that's what they are intended to be. Whatever morality it wraps itself in. So I think, do we have the grit to go all the way and to really say, those who try to destroy us, we will take them down? If one could do that even once or twice, I think that would slow down the movement greatly.
I want to be respectful of the time of the people who listened in for this last hour. Ruth, I want to thank you for writing, as usual, just a marvelous, revelatory, profound, and deeply learned essay for SAPIR. This is the first issue. We're waiting for the release, the physical release of our second issue, but you can already find Ruth's essay along with about a dozen others at sapirjournal.org. So if you haven't read Ruth's essay, please read it, and as much of the journal as you wish. I think you find yourself you'll soon find yourself reading all of it. I want to thank the Maimonides Fund, that is the publisher of SAPIR and agreed to make me the editor. I want to thank the audience for listening so attentively and for engaging in this. The subtitle of SAPIR is a journal of Jewish conversations, and that is the spirit in which all of this is being offered, as conversations principally among Jews at the highest level on the issues that matter most to who we are as Jews and as and as people engaged with the things of the world, and the things not of the world. So thank you very much. Really, Ruth, thanks to you.
Thanks, Bret. This was great.
You
Thank
graced and ennobled us by doing this. And I can't wait to read whatever it is that you write next. I've always
Thank
felt that way.
Thank
So
you.
thanks again,
Thank you.
and thanks for being part of the call.